The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Westminster Palace, as King Charles III stood before the ornate windows of his private study. His fingers traced the edge of an embossed invitation that had arrived 3 days earlier, bearing the sacred seal of Vatican City. The invitation was unlike any other he had received during his reign. Written in elegant Latin script and requesting his presence for a historic meeting with Pope Leo XIV, Queen Camilla entered the room quietly, her footsteps muffled by the Persian carpet that had belonged to his grandmother. She carried a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea, a ritual that had become their quiet comfort in the busy mornings filled with royal duties. The Queen noticed the thoughtful expression on her husband's face and the way his eyes lingered on the papal invitation. "Still thinking about Rome?" she asked, settling into the leather armchair beside his desk. Charles nodded slowly, setting the invitation down with careful reverence. The meeting with Pope Leo had been in planning for months, but now that the date was approaching, the weight of its significance felt heavier than ever. The invitation had come at a particularly meaningful time in Charles's reign. His coronation had established him as the supreme governor of the Church of England, a role that carried centuries of tradition and responsibility. Yet this meeting with the head of the Catholic Church represented something unprecedented in modern royal history. No reigning British monarch had met privately with a pope in Vatican City for over 400 years. Pope Leo XIV, born Alessandro Benedetti in a small Italian village, had become known throughout the world for his efforts to bridge religious divides. His papacy had been marked by remarkable outreach to other Christian denominations, and his invitation to King Charles was seen by many as a historic gesture of reconciliation. The Pope's reputation for humility and wisdom had made him one of the most respected religious leaders of the modern era. Charles remembered their brief encounter 2 years earlier during a Commonwealth summit in Malta. They had spoken for only a few minutes, but the Pope's genuine warmth and intelligence had left a lasting impression. Pope Leo had mentioned his hope that one day they might have a longer conversation about their shared concerns for humanitarian causes and environmental protection. The planning for this Vatican visit had involved months of delicate negotiations between Buckingham Palace, the Foreign Office, and Vatican officials. Every detail had to be carefully considered, from the ceremonial protocols to the symbolic gifts they would exchange. The King's private secretary had worked tirelessly with Vatican representatives to ensure that both the royal and papal traditions would be honored. Appropriately, Queen Camilla had initially expressed some concerns about the visit. As someone who had converted to the Anglican faith upon her marriage to Charles, she understood the sensitive nature of the religious differences that had historically divided their nations. However, she had gradually come to see the meeting as an opportunity for healing and understanding between their communities. The couple had spent several evenings in recent weeks discussing what this meeting might accomplish. Charles hoped to explore possibilities for cooperation on global issues like climate change and poverty reduction. Both he and Pope Leo had been vocal advocates for environmental protection, and their shared passion for these causes had formed the foundation for their planned discussions. The King's staff had prepared extensive briefing materials about Vatican protocols and the Pope's recent initiatives. Charles had studied these documents carefully, wanting to show proper respect for both the institution of the papacy and Pope Leo's personal achievements. He had also been learning basic Italian phrases, though he knew that Pope Leo spoke excellent English. As the days passed, anticipation grew not only within royal circles but throughout Britain and the broader Commonwealth. Religious leaders from various denominations had praised the upcoming meeting as a positive step toward greater understanding between Christian communities. The Archbishop of Canterbury had personally blessed the endeavor, seeing it as an extension of the Anglican Communion's commitment to ecumenical dialogue. Media attention had been intense from the moment the visit was announced. Commentators speculated about the historical significance and potential outcomes of the meeting. Some focused on the ceremonial aspects, wondering what gifts would be exchanged and how the traditional protocols would be adapted for this unique occasion. The Queen's own preparation had involved studying the history of papal-royal relationships and understanding the complex theological differences that had shaped centuries of separation between the Anglican and Catholic churches. She found herself fascinated by the stories of reconciliation and cooperation that had emerged in recent decades. Despite the historical tensions, Charles felt a deep sense of responsibility as he prepared for this meeting. He knew that millions of people around the world would be watching, hoping that this encounter might represent a new chapter in Christian unity. The weight of representing not only the British crown but also the Anglican tradition in this historic meeting was something he took very seriously. The final preparations were now underway. The royal household was coordinating with Vatican security to ensure the visit would proceed smoothly. Special arrangements had been made for the Queen's dietary requirements and for the King's medical needs during their stay in Rome. Every aspect of their 3-day visit had been planned with meticulous attention to detail. As evening approached, Charles stood once more at his study window, looking out over the London skyline. In just a few days, he and Camilla would board the royal aircraft for their journey to Rome, carrying with them the hopes and prayers of millions who saw this meeting as a bridge between past divisions and future possibilities. The morning of departure arrived with unusual clarity in London. King Charles and Queen Camilla emerged from Buckingham Palace at precisely 9 o'clock, their movements followed by dozens of photographers and television crews gathered behind the palace gates. The king wore a navy blue suit with a subtle pinstripe, while Queen Camilla had chosen an elegant cream-colored coat that would photograph well against the Roman architecture they would soon encounter. Their motorcade moved smoothly through London streets that had been partially cleared for the occasion. As they traveled toward the airfield, both Charles and Camilla waved to small groups of well-wishers who had gathered along the route. Some held signs expressing support for the historic meeting, while others simply wanted to witness this moment in royal history. At RAF Northolt, the royal aircraft gleamed in the morning sunlight. The crew had prepared meticulously for this flight, understanding the significance of their passengers' destination. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the lead pilot, had flown numerous royal missions but acknowledged that this journey felt particularly special. The flight plan would take them over France and Switzerland before approaching Rome from the north. As the aircraft lifted off from British soil, Queen Camilla gazed down at the familiar landscape below. She thought about the centuries of religious conflict that had shaped the relationship between Britain and Rome, and how remarkable it was that they were now flying toward a meeting that might help heal those ancient wounds. The Queen carried with her a collection of books about Vatican history and papal traditions, planning to use the flight time for final preparation. King Charles spent much of the journey reviewing his talking points with his private secretary. They discussed environmental initiatives that both he and Pope Leo had championed, potential collaborations on humanitarian projects, and ways their meeting might inspire greater cooperation between their respective communities. The king also practiced his Italian pronunciation, wanting to greet the Pope in his native language. The flight crew served a lunch that had been specially prepared to accommodate both royal preferences and the dietary considerations for their upcoming Vatican meals. As they flew over the Swiss Alps, the magnificent mountain peaks reminded both Charles and Camilla of the natural beauty that Pope Leo had worked tirelessly to protect through his environmental advocacy. Air traffic controllers in Rome had been notified of the royal flight's approach, and special security measures were already in place around Leonardo da Vinci Airport. Italian officials had coordinated closely with British security personnel to ensure the arrival would proceed smoothly while maintaining appropriate dignity for the occasion. As the aircraft began its descent toward Rome, the ancient city spread out below them like a living museum. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica was clearly visible in the distance, its golden cross catching the afternoon sunlight. Queen Camilla pointed out various landmarks to her husband, both of them marveling at the history contained within the city that would host their momentous meeting. The landing was smooth and precise, with Italian officials waiting on the tarmac to provide the traditional diplomatic welcome. Cardinal Giuseppe Marcelli, the Vatican Secretary of State, had personally come to greet the royal couple, accompanied by the British ambassador to Italy and several other distinguished guests. The cardinal's presence demonstrated the high priority that Pope Leo had placed on this visit. As King Charles and Queen Camilla descended from the aircraft, they were struck by the warmth of the Roman air and the genuine enthusiasm of their reception. Cardinal Marcelli approached with a broad smile, greeting them first in English and then offering traditional Italian welcomes. His manner was both respectful of their royal status and genuinely warm, setting a positive tone for the entire visit. The motorcade that would transport them to their accommodations consisted of armored vehicles provided by Italian security services, along with several Vatican cars bearing the papal coat of arms. The route had been carefully planned to take them through some of Rome's most historic areas, while maintaining security protocols. As they traveled through the Eternal City, both Charles and Camilla were captivated by the layers of history visible everywhere they looked. Ancient Roman ruins stood alongside Renaissance palaces and modern buildings, creating a tapestry of human civilization that had evolved over thousands of years. Street artists and vendors continued their daily activities, largely unaware of the historic passengers passing by. Their destination was a private residence that had been carefully selected for the royal visit. The villa, dating from the 16th century, had been restored to provide modern security and comfort while maintaining its historic character. Vatican staff had worked with British officials to ensure that every detail met the requirements for hosting a reigning monarch and his consort. Upon arrival at the villa, they were greeted by the resident staff and given a brief orientation about the facilities and schedule for their stay. The building's frescoed walls and marble floors provided an appropriately elegant setting for their preparation time before the crucial meeting with Pope Leo. That evening, as they settled into their temporary Roman home, King Charles and Queen Camilla stood together on a terrace overlooking the city. The lights of Rome twinkled below them, and in the distance they could see the illuminated dome of St. Peter's Basilica. Tomorrow would bring the meeting that had captured the attention of the world. The Queen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Not just the physical travel from London to Rome, but the longer historical journey of their two nations and churches toward this opportunity for understanding. She felt honored to be part of what might become a significant moment in the ongoing story of Christian reconciliation. Charles shared her sense of anticipation and responsibility. As he prepared for sleep, he offered a quiet prayer for wisdom and guidance in the conversations that lay ahead. The meeting with Pope Leo represented more than just a diplomatic encounter. It was an opportunity to build bridges that might last for generations. Dawn broke over Rome with the gentle warmth that had welcomed travelers to the Eternal City for thousands of years. King Charles woke early, as was his custom, and stepped onto the terrace of their temporary residence to watch the sun illuminate the ancient rooftops and church spires that defined the Roman skyline. The city was already beginning to stir with the quiet energy of early morning vendors and commuters beginning their daily routines. Queen Camilla joined him with their morning tea, and together they watched as the golden light gradually revealed more details of the magnificent architecture surrounding them. In a few hours, they would enter Vatican City for their historic meeting with Pope Leo XIV, but for now, they allowed themselves this peaceful moment to appreciate the beauty of their surroundings. Their breakfast was served in a sun-filled dining room decorated with frescoes depicting scenes from Roman mythology. The villa's staff had prepared a selection of both British and Italian specialties, understanding that this meal needed to provide both comfort and appropriate nourishment for the important day ahead. Charles opted for his usual simple breakfast, while Camilla tried some local pastries that had been recommended by their hosts. At 9 o'clock, Cardinal Marcelli arrived to escort them on a preliminary tour of Vatican City before their formal audience with the Pope. The Cardinal had suggested this approach to help them become familiar with the surroundings and to understand the historical context of the meeting that would take place later that afternoon. Their convoy passed through Rome's morning traffic with the efficiency that Italian officials had perfected for important state visits. As they approached the walls of Vatican City, both Charles and Camilla felt the significance of crossing into the world's smallest sovereign state. The Swiss guards at the entrance stood at attention in their colorful uniforms, maintaining centuries-old traditions of papal protection. Once inside Vatican City, the royal couple was struck by the immediate change in atmosphere. The bustling energy of Rome gave way to a more contemplative environment, where art, spirituality, and history seemed to converge in every direction they looked. Cardinal Marcelli proved to be an excellent guide, sharing stories and insights that brought the ancient stones to life. Their first stop was the Vatican Museums, where they were given a private tour of some of the world's most precious artistic treasures. Queen Camilla was particularly moved by the Raphael rooms, where the Renaissance masters' frescoes had survived for centuries to inspire visitors from around the globe. She found herself imagining the countless pilgrims and dignitaries who had walked these same corridors over the years. King Charles was fascinated by the gallery of maps, where 16th-century cartographers had created detailed depictions of the known world. As someone deeply interested in history and geography, he spent considerable time studying the maps and discussing their historical significance with Cardinal Marcelli. The cardinal noted how these maps represented humanity's expanding understanding of the world. Much like the dialogue between different Christian traditions had evolved over time, the Sistine Chapel provided perhaps the most powerful moment of their tour. Standing beneath Michelangelo's masterpiece, both Charles and Camilla felt overwhelmed by the artistic genius and spiritual devotion that had created such beauty. The cardinal allowed them several minutes of quiet contemplation in the space where papal conclaves had elected leaders of the Catholic Church for centuries. As they emerged from the chapel, Cardinal Marcelli shared some background about Pope Leo's own relationship with art and culture. The Pope had studied art history before entering the seminary and maintained a deep appreciation for how artistic expression could communicate spiritual truths across cultural and linguistic barriers. This shared interest would provide another connection point for his conversation with King Charles. Their tour continued through the Vatican gardens, where Pope Leo often walked for reflection and prayer. The carefully maintained paths wound through landscaped areas that included plants and trees from around the world, symbolizing the global nature of the Catholic Church. Queen Camilla, with her own love of gardening, was delighted to learn about some of the rare species that had been cultivated in these sacred grounds. During their garden walk, they encountered several Vatican employees who were going about their daily tasks. Cardinal Marcelli introduced them to a groundskeeper who had worked in the gardens for over 30 years and who lit up with joy when he learned that Queen Camilla shared his passion for horticulture. These spontaneous human connections added warmth to what might otherwise have been a purely formal visit. Lunch was served in a private dining room within the Apostolic Palace, where they were joined by several Vatican officials who would be present during the afternoon's meeting with Pope Leo. The conversation flowed easily between English and Italian, with Cardinal Marcelli serving as translator when needed. The meal featured traditional Roman cuisine prepared by the Vatican's skilled chefs. During lunch, they learned more about Pope Leo's background and current initiatives. Born Alessandro Benedetti in the small Italian town of Montepulciano, he had been known for his intellectual curiosity and pastoral heart long before his election to the papacy. His doctoral thesis had focused on ecumenical dialogue between Christian denominations, making him uniquely prepared for this historic meeting with the British monarch. The Pope's reputation for environmental advocacy had grown during his papacy, with several encyclicals addressing climate change and humanity's responsibility to care for creation. This passion aligned closely with King Charles's own long-standing environmental concerns, providing natural common ground for their discussions. As the afternoon approached, the royal couple returned to their residence to prepare for the formal audience. Queen Camilla changed into a black dress with a delicate lace mantilla, following the traditional protocol for papal audiences. King Charles wore his formal diplomatic attire, including the decorations appropriate for a meeting between heads of state. Their final preparations included a review of the ceremonial protocols that would govern their meeting. Vatican officials had worked carefully with British diplomats to create a format that honored both royal and papal traditions while allowing for meaningful personal conversation between the two leaders. As they prepared to return to Vatican City for the historic meeting, both Charles and Camilla felt a mixture of anticipation and reverence. They carried with them not only the hopes of their own nation, but also the prayers of millions around the world who saw this encounter as an opportunity for greater understanding between Christian communities that had been separated for far too long. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Apostolic Palace as King Charles and Queen Camilla were escorted through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of papal history. Their footsteps echoed softly on the marble floors as Swiss guards in ceremonial dress stood at attention along their route. The moment they had been preparing for during months of planning was finally at hand. Cardinal Marcelli led them to the antechamber of the papal library, where they paused for final instructions about the protocols that would govern their historic meeting. The cardinal's voice was gentle but serious as he explained the traditional gestures of respect and the order in which the introductions would take place. Both Charles and Camilla listened carefully, understanding that every detail mattered in this unprecedented encounter. The doors to the papal library opened silently, revealing a room that perfectly balanced scholarly dignity with spiritual warmth. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with centuries of theological works and papal documents. Afternoon light streamed through windows that overlooked the Vatican gardens, creating an atmosphere of peaceful contemplation. Pope Leo XIII stood near his desk, his white cassock simple but elegant against the rich colors of the ancient books surrounding him. His face bore the gentle smile that had become familiar to millions around the world. But in person, his presence seemed to radiate both humility and authority. As the royal couple entered, he stepped forward with evident pleasure at this long-awaited meeting. King Charles approached first, following the careful choreography they had rehearsed. His bow was respectful but appropriate for one sovereign greeting another, and when Pope Leo extended his hand, Charles accepted it with genuine warmth. The Pope's greeting in accented but fluent English immediately put the king at ease, and Charles responded with the Italian phrases he had been practicing. Queen Camilla's introduction followed, her curtsy graceful, and her demeanor showing both respect for the papal office and personal appreciation for this opportunity. Pope Leo's greeting to her was particularly warm, acknowledging her role not only as queen consort, but as someone who had shown genuine interest in interfaith dialogue throughout her royal duties. After the formal introductions, Pope Leo invited his guests to sit in comfortable chairs arranged near the windows. He had chosen this setting deliberately, preferring the natural light and garden views to the more formal throne room, where many papal audiences took place. His manner was that of a scholar, welcoming fellow intellectuals rather than a religious leader receiving subjects. The conversation began with Pope Leo's inquiries about their journey and their impressions of Rome. His questions showed genuine curiosity about their experiences, and both Charles and Camilla found themselves relaxing as they shared their enthusiasm for the city's art and history. The Pope's own love for Rome was evident as he described some of his favorite spots in the city and recommended places they might visit during their stay. As they settled into deeper conversation, Pope Leo shifted to topics that revealed their shared concerns about global challenges. His questions about King Charles's environmental initiatives showed detailed knowledge of the monarch's work, and Charles was impressed by the Pope's own understanding of climate science and conservation efforts. They discovered mutual admiration for several environmental scientists and shared frustration about the slow pace of international action on climate change. Queen Camilla contributed thoughtfully to their discussion about humanitarian efforts, particularly those focused on education and healthcare in developing nations. Pope Leo praised her work with literacy programs and expressed interest in potential collaborations between Catholic charities and Commonwealth organizations. Their conversation revealed genuine passion for improving lives in some of the world's most challenging circumstances. The Pope then addressed what many had considered the most sensitive aspect of their meeting, the historical divisions between the Anglican and Catholic churches. His approach was both historically informed and remarkably gracious, acknowledging past hurts while focusing on opportunities for future cooperation. Charles responded with equal thoughtfulness, expressing his own commitment to building bridges between Christian communities. Pope Leo shared his vision for what he called unity and diversity among Christian denominations. He spoke about maintaining distinct traditions while working together on shared values and common challenges. His theological training was evident in his careful explanations, but his tone remained pastoral and accessible rather than academic. The king found himself drawn into a fascinating discussion about the role of tradition in modern religious life. Both leaders grappled with questions about preserving ancient wisdom while remaining relevant to contemporary believers. Their conversation revealed similar challenges in leading institutions that valued both continuity and adaptation. As their formal meeting time drew toward a close, Pope Leo presented the royal couple with carefully chosen gifts. For King Charles, he had selected a first-edition papal encyclical about environmental stewardship, knowing of the king's interest in both historical documents and ecological issues. For Queen Camilla, he offered a beautifully illustrated manuscript about medieval monasteries, Acknowledging her appreciation for art and history, Charles and Camilla reciprocated with gifts they had brought from Britain. The king presented Pope Leo with a specially commissioned book featuring photographs of Britain's ancient churches and cathedrals, highlighting the shared architectural heritage of their Christian traditions. Queen Camilla offered a collection of seeds from the gardens at Highgrove, the king's private residence, chosen specifically for their ability to thrive in Mediterranean climates. The exchange of gifts led to more personal conversation about their respective roles and responsibilities. Pope Leo spoke candidly about the challenges of leading a global church in an increasingly secular world, while Charles shared his own reflections on representing both religious and national traditions in modern times. Their mutual understanding was evident in the thoughtful questions they asked each other. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this meeting was exceeding everyone's expectations. The conversation flowed naturally between serious theological discussions and lighter moments of shared humor. Both leaders demonstrated the kind of intellectual curiosity and human warmth that had made them effective. In their respective roles, Pope Leo concluded their formal meeting with a prayer that he offered, in both Latin and English, asking for divine blessing on their continued efforts to serve their communities and build understanding between peoples. His words were simple but profound, capturing the spirit of reconciliation that had characterized their entire encounter. As they prepared to leave the papal library, both Charles and Camilla expressed their gratitude for the Pope's generosity with his time and wisdom. Pope Leo responded by inviting them to consider this meeting as the beginning of an ongoing dialogue rather than a single event. His words suggested possibilities for future collaboration that neither side had explicitly planned, but that seemed natural given the rapport they had established. The evening following their meeting with Pope Leo found King Charles and Queen Camilla back at their Roman residence, both still processing the extraordinary encounter that had exceeded all their expectations. The formal audience had been scheduled to last 1 hour, but their conversation had extended to nearly 2 hours, as both the Pope and the royal couple found themselves engaged in discussions that seemed to flow naturally from one meaningful topic to another. Charles sat in the villa's study, reviewing notes he had taken immediately after leaving the Vatican. His private secretary had been waiting to debrief him about the meeting, but the king wanted to capture his own impressions while they were still fresh in his memory. The depth of Pope Leo's knowledge about environmental science had particularly impressed him, as had the Pope's practical suggestions for collaborative initiatives between their communities. Queen Camilla was in the garden, speaking by telephone with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been eagerly awaiting news of the historic meeting. She described the Pope's warmth and intelligence, emphasizing how their conversation had focused on shared values rather than theological differences. The Archbishop's response was filled with gratitude and hope for the possibilities this meeting might create for future ecumenical dialogue. News of the meeting's success had already begun to spread through both Vatican and royal communication channels. Cardinal Marcelli had briefed Vatican journalists about the positive atmosphere and substantial discussions, while the King's press secretary had prepared initial statements for release to British media. Both sides were careful to emphasize the respectful nature of the encounter and the mutual interest in continued dialogue. The reaction from religious leaders around the world was swift and overwhelmingly positive. Anglican bishops throughout the Commonwealth expressed appreciation for the King's representation of their tradition, while Catholic leaders praised Pope Leo's gracious hospitality and bridge-building approach. Protestant denominations that had historically been skeptical of both papal and royal authority found themselves cautiously optimistic about the possibilities for broader Christian cooperation. That evening, Charles and Camilla attended a private dinner hosted by the British ambassador to Italy. The guest list included Vatican officials, Italian dignitaries, and representatives from various Christian organizations in Rome. The conversation around the dinner table reflected the excitement that many felt about the potential implications of the royal papal meeting. Cardinal Marcelli, who attended the dinner as Pope Leo's representative, shared some of the Pope's own reflections on the afternoon's encounter. According to the Cardinal, Pope Leo had been particularly impressed by King Charles's detailed knowledge of environmental issues and by Queen Camilla's genuine interest in educational initiatives. The Pope had also appreciated their evident respect for Vatican traditions and their serious approach to the religious significance of their meeting. During the dinner, several Italian academics specializing in church history offered their perspectives on the unprecedented nature of this royal papal encounter. Professor Maria Rossi from the Gregorian University noted that, while medieval monarchs had often visited popes, this was the first time a post-Reformation British sovereign had met privately with a pope in Vatican City for purposes of religious dialogue rather than purely diplomatic business. The conversation also touched on practical possibilities that might emerge from the meeting. Father James McKenna, an Irish priest who directed Catholic Anglican dialogue programs in Rome, suggested that the royal visit might encourage local churches to pursue their own interfaith initiatives. He noted that grassroots cooperation often followed high-level symbolic gestures like the one they had witnessed. Queen Camilla found herself in an engaging conversation with Sister Catherine Morrison, an American nun who ran educational programs for refugee children in Rome. Their discussion about literacy initiatives led to specific ideas about how royal patronage might support Catholic charitable work without crossing inappropriate theological boundaries. The Queen's practical approach to philanthropy impressed the sister and other charitable workers present. As the evening progressed, Charles noticed how naturally the conversation had evolved beyond the formal protocols that typically governed such events. The success of his meeting with Pope Leo seemed to have created an atmosphere where people felt comfortable discussing possibilities they might not have considered before. The king made mental notes about several collaboration ideas that emerged organically from these conversations. The next morning brought a more public dimension to their Vatican visit. Pope Leo had invited the royal couple to attend his Wednesday general audience in St. Peter's Square, where he would meet with thousands of pilgrims and visitors from around the world. This appearance would provide their first public moment to gather and allow the global Catholic community to witness the positive relationship that had developed between their leaders. Preparations for the public appearance required careful coordination between Vatican and royal security teams. The Pope's weekly audiences typically drew crowds of 10,000 or more, and news of the British royals' attendance had generated even greater interest. Special seating arrangements were made to ensure appropriate protocol, while allowing the crowd to see their honored guests. As they prepared for this public appearance, both Charles and Camilla reflected on how much their understanding had deepened during their brief time in Rome. The formal meeting with Pope Leo had been only part of their education about contemporary Catholic life and the complex challenges facing religious leadership in the modern world. Charles had been particularly struck by the Pope's comments about the isolation that religious leaders sometimes experienced, despite being surrounded by advisors and supporters. Pope Leo's honest reflection on the personal costs of his office had resonated with the king's own experience of the burdens that came with inherited responsibility and public service. Queen Camilla had found herself thinking about the Pope's emphasis on the role of women in church life, a topic they had discussed briefly during their meeting. While acknowledging the theological differences between their traditions, Pope Leo had expressed appreciation for the Anglican Church's ordination of women and had spoken thoughtfully about ways the Catholic Church might expand women's leadership roles within its existing framework. Their preparation for the public audience also included reviewing the short remarks that Pope Leo would make acknowledging their presence. Vatican officials had shared a draft of his comments, which focused on themes of Christian unity and shared service to humanity. The Pope planned to speak in multiple languages, ensuring that the international crowd could understand his message of welcome and reconciliation. As they dressed for this public appearance, both Charles and Camilla felt the weight of representing their nation and their church tradition before a global Catholic audience. They understood that their presence at the papal audience would be seen by millions of people around the world as a symbol of the improved relationship between their communities. The morning was bright and clear as they prepared to return to Vatican City for what would be their final official engagement of this historic visit. Both felt grateful for the unexpected depth of connection they had experienced and hopeful about the possibilities for future cooperation that their meeting had created. St. Peter's Square filled with early morning sunlight as thousands of pilgrims and visitors gathered for Pope Leo's weekly general audience. The magnificent colonnade designed by Bernini embraced the crowd like outstretched arms, creating an atmosphere of welcome that had drawn believers to this sacred space for centuries. Among the assembled faithful were Catholics from every continent, tourists eager to see the Pope, and now, for the first time in modern history, a reigning British monarch and his consort. King Charles and Queen Camilla arrived at the Vatican an hour before the audience was scheduled to begin, allowing time for final preparations and a brief private meeting with Pope Leo before their public appearance together. The Pope greeted them in the same library where their historic conversation had taken place the previous day, his manner showing both the warmth that had developed between them and the significance he placed on this public moment. Today, the whole world will see that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, Pope Leo said as they prepared to proceed to St. Peter's Square. His words reflected the spirit that had characterized their entire encounter, focusing on unity rather than division, on shared values rather than theological differences. The papal procession through St. Peter's Square was a spectacle that never failed to move observers, regardless of their religious background. Pope Leo rode in the specially designed vehicle that allowed him to greet the crowd while maintaining security, his white cassock brilliant against the morning sky. For this special occasion, King Charles and Queen Camilla followed in a separate vehicle, waving to the enthusiastic crowd that had gathered to witness this unprecedented moment. The response from the crowd was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted as people recognized the British royals, and many began waving small Union Jack flags alongside the Vatican, banners they had brought for the Pope. Italian tour guides could be heard explaining to their groups the historical significance of what they were witnessing, while smartphone cameras captured countless images of the moment. As they took their places on the platform overlooking the square, Charles and Camilla were struck by the diversity of the crowd before them. Pilgrims wearing traditional dress from African nations sat beside business people from European cities. Families with small children shared space with elderly visitors who had perhaps saved for years to make this journey to Rome. The universal appeal of the papal audience was evident in the faces turned toward the platform. Pope Leo began his address with the traditional greetings in multiple languages that had become a hallmark of his general audiences. His warmth and humor were immediately apparent as he acknowledged visitors from different countries and made gentle jokes that transcended language barriers. The crowd responded with laughter and applause, creating an atmosphere of joy that set the stage for his more serious remarks. When the Pope turned to acknowledge the presence of King Charles and Queen Camilla, the square erupted in sustained applause. His words, delivered in English and then translated into Italian and several other languages, emphasized themes of Christian unity and mutual respect that had characterized their private conversations. We welcome today our beloved brother King Charles and our sister Queen Camilla, who honor us with their presence, Pope Leo said, his voice carrying clearly across the square through the sophisticated sound system. Their visit reminds us that what unites us as Christians is far greater than what has divided us in the past. Together we serve the same Lord, and together we are called to care for our common home and our human family. The Pope's remarks were carefully crafted to acknowledge both the significance of the moment and the theological realities that continued to distinguish their traditions. He spoke about the importance of dialogue and understanding, while respecting the integrity of different Christian communities. His words were both diplomatically appropriate and genuinely heartfelt. King Charles, who had not been scheduled to speak publicly during the audience, found himself moved to respond briefly when Pope Leo invited him to greet the crowd. Standing at the microphone, the king expressed his gratitude for the warm welcome and spoke about the importance of working together on the challenges facing humanity. Your Holiness, in our conversations, we have discovered that our shared commitment to caring for creation and serving those in need transcends the boundaries that have historically separated our communities, Charles said. His words met with enthusiastic applause from the crowd. May this visit be a symbol of hope that dialogue and understanding can overcome division and lead to greater cooperation in service to all humanity. Queen Camilla also offered brief remarks, expressing her personal appreciation for the hospitality they had received and her admiration for the charitable work being carried out by Catholic organizations around the world. Her words about the importance of education and literacy in developing nations resonated particularly well with the international audience. Following the formal remarks, Pope Leo invited the royal couple to join him in greeting pilgrims from various countries. This spontaneous addition to the program created some of the most memorable moments of their visit, as they found themselves speaking with families who had traveled great distances to attend the audience. A group of British Catholics who had been living in Rome were particularly emotional when they met their king and queen in the papal setting. One elderly woman, originally from Liverpool but now a longtime Roman resident, expressed through tears how meaningful it was to see her monarch and her pope together, symbolizing a healing she had never expected to witness in her lifetime. The audience concluded with Pope Leo's traditional apostolic blessing, which he extended to include King Charles and Queen Camilla by name. This gesture, while ceremonially appropriate, was also symbolically powerful, representing papal recognition of their roles as Christian leaders despite their different denominational affiliations. As they prepared to leave St. Peter's Square, both Charles and Camilla took final moments to appreciate the magnificent architecture surrounding them and the extraordinary experience they had shared. The crowd continued to applaud and wave as they departed, many calling out good wishes for their journey home. Their final afternoon in Rome was spent in quiet reflection and preparation for departure. Charles used the time to draft personal thank you notes to Pope Leo and Cardinal Marcelli, while Camilla wrote in her private journal about the emotions and insights that had marked their historic visit. The flight back to London provided time for both of them to process the significance of what they had experienced. As they flew over the same European landscape they had crossed 2 days earlier, both realized that they were returning home fundamentally changed by their encounter with Pope Leo and their glimpse into contemporary Vatican life. The impact of their visit became apparent even before they landed in London. Religious leaders throughout the Commonwealth had issued statements praising the meeting, while newspapers around the world featured front-page coverage of the historic encounter. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for the visit among British citizens of all faiths. More importantly, the visit had created new possibilities for cooperation that neither side had fully anticipated when the meeting was first planned. In the weeks that followed, practical collaborations began to emerge between Anglican and Catholic organizations working on environmental protection, refugee assistance, and educational initiatives. As their aircraft touched down at RAF Northolt, King Charles and Queen Camilla knew they had participated in something truly historic. Their meeting with Pope Leo had opened doors that had been closed for centuries and had created new hope for Christian unity in an increasingly divided world. The seeds of understanding planted during their Roman visit would continue to grow in ways they could only begin to imagine.